Jared Polin, FroKnowsPhoto.com, and welcome to the video guide. What we are going to crush in this guide is the fundamentals of what you need to know to work any type of digital SLR camera to get the fundamentals of videography down. We are gonna crush the term one-man band. Why? Because we're gonna show you how you can do everything on your own, from the audio to setting up your camera to the lighting to whatever it is that you need to learn. Well, we're gonna crush it. And now I wanna introduce Todd Wolf, who is the resident expert. What else are we gonna be doing?
The one-man band thing when it comes to DSLR video, I think is really important, because not only are we going to show you everything you need to do from sound to lighting to composition to everything within the camera and all the gear you put onto it, but it's going to make you a more powerful, knowledgeable filmmaker by knowing all those departments. So eventually when you do grow and you do hire extra people, you'll have a good knowledge base of everything going on. I'm also excited about the fact that once we teach everything, we're gonna go out into the field and actually show everybody how to shoot a variety of different videos, whether it be a corporate video or a music video or a narrative, like a short film. That's the kind of stuff that's really gonna show off how powerful these tools that we're gonna give everybody really are and make the best videos.
So even if you're just starting out or you've had your camera and you're trying to figure it out over a little bit of time, you're going to watch this guide and be able to go out and do everything on your own. That is what is so important about what you're going to learn in this guide. So once you understand the very basics and the fundamentals, you can grow from there. So instead of just standing here and talking about it, let's go and start doing it. So this is a pretty simple section. Of course, you need a camera in order to capture video. Now, many of you guys out there already have a camera, but do you have a full frame? Do you have a crop sensor? Do you have a micro four thirds or mirrorless camera? Well, they're all going to, in essence, do the same thing as long as you understand the fundamentals and basics. So when we run through cameras like this, you have a full frame option, which gives you better low light capability and full 35mm frame. Then you've got your crop sensor cameras over here. Todd, what's the difference with the crop sensors?
I think the biggest thing that I had to figure out was when you put a lens on a crop sensor camera, it magnifies that lens. It's not a bad thing, as long as you're aware of it going into it, knowing that if you put a 50 on it, it might turn into like a 75. It may be more difficult to pull focus, but as long as you're aware of that, you shouldn't have any problems.
So going around the table, there's other things that are important. I know it's simple, but batteries. Get extra batteries. You can't just have one and expect to do a shoot, because what happens when it dies? Well, not only do you need 1 or 2 or 12 batteries, but you need to have chargers, maybe 1 or 2. And then there's another option which some people use and some people recommend not to, but you have an AC adapter that can plug into a camera. But I know that Todd has something to say about using these.
Yeah, the one problem that I have is that anytime you have this plugged into a wall, if you've got a power surge, if you have an electrical problem in your house, that could absolutely affect your footage. And that's really not something you want to do when you're having a professional shoot and everything you're shooting is really important to the client. So I'd probably recommend just sticking to batteries in camera. Use the AC adapters for your monitor, for your lights, and things of that nature.
All right, cool. So, another thing that you want to make sure, memory cards are extremely important. Now, there's a ton of different brands out there, but this is one thing that you do not want to cheap out on. Buy the best brand that you can get, because if a card goes bad and you just did a whole shoot that you got paid for, you had crew, you had everybody out there, well, you're out of luck if the card goes bad. So I recommend using the faster cards. Some of them are class 10. If you're using SD cards, then you've got the 800X and 1000X CF cards, which is compact flash. But, Todd, what do you recommend in size?
You want to go with the best brand, but then it may be a little pricey. So some people may be like, well, I'm just going to get myself an 8GB card. You're going to burn through that quickly. Video takes a lot of data.
And as the cameras get bigger and better, you're going to start getting into higher resolutions, which means you're going to be chewing up more memory.
Absolutely. Now, on the opposite end of the spectrum, you may say, well, I'm just going to get a 64 gig, 128 gig. That is going to come to bite you when you go to dump that footage and you're on set and everybody's waiting. It's going to take a longer amount of time to dump those cards. I think a good medium range is a 32GB card. You've got the length to shoot for a good amount of time, and to dump those cards, it won't take forever.
So the moral of the story here is not just have one card. Have multiple cards, but don't cheap out on them. Memory cards are extremely important, like we said, but what's something to think about when you're on location with memory and also after the fact?
The most important thing with all this data and all this important footage you got is backing it up and getting it where it needs to be. What I usually take on set and what I would recommend in an ideal situation would be to have a laptop on set, have a card reader to pull all the data off the cards, and then have a hard drive or even 2 hard drives on set to back it up and then back it up again.
So one other option, if you don't have that just yet, you can still have a laptop, which is always good, because when you're on set or on location, it's better off, you are better off transferring the data there and not waiting till you get home so that you can have redundancy. So if you don't have the multiple hard drives set up, you can offload the card to the computer hard drive, and then you already have the one on the card. So right there you have 2, and you're not really spending a lot of extra money, but again, in the ideal situation.
And keep in mind, folks may be working with a limited amount of memory cards. So they may not have enough cards to shoot all day. So they may have to dump their cards.
So that is a basic, simple rundown from the camera to the batteries to the cards. Now we're gonna move on into the next section.
Let's do it.
Jared here with just the tip. From time to time, Todd and I are gonna cut in here with quick tips, so pay attention. So now let's jump into shutter speed. Now, it's a little different with video than it is with stills. There's a lot of rules of thumb that apply to both, but what we want to do here is demonstrate what's going to happen as we change the shutter speeds. So Todd's going to talk to us about the general rules of thumb.
Your shutter speed is directly tied into your frame rate. We generally stay around 24 frames per second for that cinematic, that movie-like look. Now the shutter speed is directly attached to that. You want to be double your frame rate in your shutter speed, and that helps to retain that motion blur, that movie-like image quality that we all like. So if we're at 24 frames per second, ideally we'd want to be at 1/48th of a second. We don't have that option in this camera. What we can do though is be at 1/50th of a second to get that same effect.
Sure, and the same thing applies when you're at 30 frames a second. You would double that to 1/60th of a second on your shutter speed, and then when you go to 60 frames a second, you would double that to 1/20th of a second. Again, these are rules of thumb, so what are we going to do here to demonstrate?
We're going to stick with that cinematic movie-like look. So 24 frames per second is where we're going to live on all these examples. The only thing we're going to change is the shutter speed. So let's start off with this 1/50th of a second and see what that looks like.
What we're going to do here is show you how shutter speed affects what's going on in the image. We're going to use a metronome, so we have something that's constant and moving. We've already locked in the settings for the camera because all we're focusing in on right here is what's going to happen when we change the shutter speed. All right, let's see what happens with this metronome as an example.
All right, and we're rolling and action. Now this is a very pleasing image. This is that cinematic look we were talking about. Great place to be.
This looks all right. What's going to happen if we slow it down to 1/30th of a second?
Let's see what it looks like. So we're down to 1/30th and we're recording. Now what's going to happen here is we're just picking up more of that motion blur. Not a terrible thing, but it's definitely something to be aware of if you push it down that far.
Right, so again, with photography, as you slow the shutter speed down, things blur more. As you raise the shutter speed, it kind of makes them crispy and freezes them more. Now I noticed this when I used to do videos out in my backyard and I'd have butterflies going by at 1,000th of a second. They wouldn't be smooth and buttery in the background, they'd be jittery and choppy. So we've done a 50th of a second, we've done the 30th. Where are we going to go next?
Let's go up to 2/50th of a second. So as you can see here, that motion blur has decreased significantly. And we're getting a jittery look to it. It's a very crisp look, almost video-like. Not terrible, definitely an option if stylistically that's what you're looking for, but it's not that cinematic look that people are used to.
Right, and that's when you're going for a cinematic look. Again, these are just rules that you don't have to follow, but there's a reason why they are rules. But remember, rules can be broken. This is for you to see the cause and effect of what's going on and decide for yourself what works for you. We're at 2/50th, where are we going to next?
Let's go up to 1,000. And here at 1,000, the jitter's way more pronounced. What people might call staccato. It's very jittery, very jumpy. It's that Saving Private Ryan, Storming the Beach type of look. It's not a terrible thing, but just be aware that that's a stylistic choice you'd have to make.
Sure, so I'm gonna stop this real quick. So what you saw there at 1,000th of a second was a very crisp image. You could see the metronome going back and forth like it was freezing it. So depending on what your job is, what you're trying to capture, that may work. But the general rules of thumb are there for a reason. You want to learn them, stick to some of them, and decide on what you want to do when that situation arises. Is that right?
Absolutely. All these things come down to your stylistic choice, what you choose to do from project to project and the look you're looking for and what the client wants as well.
Sure, so as you saw there, the shutter speeds, we went from 50th of a second to 30th of a second, and then worked our way up to the faster ones, 250th and 1000, just so that you could see what's going to happen. So you saw a bunch of different examples right here. Now, when we get into the field and show you what we're doing, we're gonna tell you what settings we're on so that you can see for yourself whether we like that slow shutter speed or we like that fast shutter speed, and it all depends on what we're shooting. So Todd, let's move on out.
Let's do it. Todd here with one more tip. Don't use generic batteries. Try to use the batteries made by your camera's manufacturer for better performance.
All right, now we've come up to aperture, and aperture plays a major part in not just photography, but video as well. So when we're shooting photos, we know that as the aperture opens up, we're letting more light in, but it also affects your depth of field. So we're here with a couple of demonstrations to show you guys what's happening here. Todd, what's the first demonstration we're gonna do?
Well, on the camera here, we've got a 50mm lens 1.4, shallow depth on this thing. All I'm getting right now is just your left hand pinky in focus. What I'd like to try to do is get your whole left hand in focus, and then next I would like to try to get both your hands and maybe even the whole piano in focus.
And the only thing you're gonna change here is just your aperture.
Absolutely.
So what Todd's doing there, you see that just the pinky's in focus? He's not gonna follow focus right now. What he is doing is locking his focus in just to show you how when you change the aperture, the depth of field is going to change. But remember, things are going to change. You have to revert back to your exposure triangle because as you go from 1.4 to say 5.6, you're cutting back on the amount of light coming in, but we're doing this just for demonstrations. We've got 1.4, Todd.
Yep.
Where are we gonna go to next?
Let's go up to 5.6 and see if we can get that left hand all in focus.
Okay.
There we go, 5.6, and your entire left hand is in focus now. Looks great. Your right hand, still out of focus though.
All right, how are we gonna get the right hand in focus?
Let's try to go up to F11 and see if that gets us what we need.
All right, go for it.
All right, we're close at F11, but your right hand is still a little bit out of focus. Let's go to the extreme. Let's go to F22.
All right.
Wow, okay. F22, I've got your right hand in focus, I've got your left hand in focus, and I've got the back wall in focus at this point. Everything's in focus.
Right, so what is going on here? At f1.4, we just had my pinky, but remember, it's narrow, it's shallow, and as it goes up, it's expanding so that you have more things in focus. And we didn't even change the focus. We just set it once at the beginning and then just changed our aperture. So keep that in mind. It's a pretty good example that we went from having one thing in focus to having everything in focus all the way down the piano. Now that's good when you have your focus locked in, but what's gonna happen as we try to follow my focus? I don't know. I'm gonna throw it over to Todd to try and follow me at 1.4.
All right, let me get down to 1.4 here. And have at it.
So I know I'm no Liberace, but what's going on?
You were making it hard for me as well. At 1.4, it's really difficult to keep up, especially when you're jumping around the keys like you were. I'm really chasing the focus at that point.
Right, so as you can tell, at 1.4, Todd was having a tough time following the focus. Shooting at 1.4 can work if you're shooting things that aren't moving, so you have to decide on your aperture depending on what scene you're in. If you try to pull your focus like Todd was doing here, you may not be able to follow the hand, which may mean that the footage is useless because nothing is sharp or in focus.
Focusing is an acquired skill. At 1.4, you may be able to pull that off, and it looks really nice when you accomplish it, but until then, let's try to bump it up to 5.6 with your left hand all in focus and see how that works.
So before you do that, where are you looking to focus? Being that you're doing this manually, what point of my hand are you looking for?
I'm gonna go to the middle of the hand, the middle finger around abouts.
All right, so let's try this out.
All right, and action.
No Liberace. So how'd that look?
Much easier. I was able to, even when you were throwing me the curveballs coming up and down the keys, I was able to nail that each time. And, you know, I may have been off a little bit, but because of it being at 5.6, it still looks sharp.
Right, so basically what's happening is you have the ability to be off just a little bit, but at 5.6, it's easier to get that rack focus going, and you don't even have any extra devices on this lens. You're just doing it yourself, so that's pretty cool, but what do you want to do now?
What I'd like to try is use the second hand, and I'll try to actually rack focus between the two hands.
That's a good idea. So what Todd's gonna do when he says rack focus, he's gonna pull from the left hand to the right hand and back again. It just creates some interesting aspects of your video. So Todd, I'll just play right here.
You got it.
So how's that looking, Todd?
That looks great. I was absolutely able to pull from the left hand to the right hand, and it's a great cinematic look. That's why a lot of people gravitate towards these DSLRs, that shallow focus, that cinematic look, racking focus from one thing to another. Storytelling through focus looked great. I think it's definitely a good tool in your arsenal.
Yeah, so that's one thing that you don't get with still photography. You can take one picture, you can take another picture, you can change your focus, but in video, you start to build that story, and we're gonna do that out on location. You're gonna see us build stories, and like Todd says, you can build the story through focus. So now, let's try to get both hands in focus here for whatever story you're trying to tell.
Pulling that focus, having that rack focus, is a nice cinematic touch. Now, if you were playing even faster, doing those scales even faster, I may not be able to keep up with you. And I think that's where we might want to bump it up to the F11 or F22. I think for this purpose, I might go kind of in between and try F16.
Okay.
All right, and action. Didn't have to do really too much there. Everything was in focus.
Is it a boring scene like that?
I was just gonna say, it makes it very easy for the camera operator to have everything in focus, but there's no drama, nothing really interesting going on. I'm not telling any story, it's just, it's really flat.
It's a static shot, basically, of a guy playing piano. Now, for one take, that may be good just to have those options, but when you're trying to create some more dynamic results, you were playing with the depth of field, so that's pretty cool.
And I think where you may want to do F16, F22, a wide open, is when you're shooting a wide shot where kind of everything there is important. Or maybe I'm on a steady cam rig, a glide cam, where I don't have the option to pull focus, and you need everything in focus. Everything in this big scene is important. It's when you get into the details, small things like pianos and fingers, that shallow depth of field plays a lot better.
All right, guys. A lot of this depends on what you're shooting. What style are you going for? Are you looking for a shallow depth of field to create some interesting emotion? Or are you looking to have just about everything in focus? It depends on what you're doing, but we just wanted to show you an example of showing you the narrow all the way to the expanded at F22 just to get this feeling down. I think we did it, Todd.
A fabulous pianist.
Jared here with another tip. When you're not recording, be sure to turn off live view. It's gonna save the juice of your batteries. All right, now it's time to talk about ISO. We hit shutter speed, we hit aperture, but ISO is controlling how sensitive to light your image sensor is. Todd, what are we gonna do here?
Well, what's so popular about the DSLR cameras is their sensitivity to light. They work phenomenally in low light situations. Unfortunately, folks can have a tendency to rely on that a little too much. They bump up the ISO to as high as it can go. You might be able to get the shot, but just because you can bump it up that high doesn't mean that you should.
Yeah, so what we're gonna do here is we're gonna start at a low ISO, we're gonna then raise it to a medium level, and then we're gonna put it up at an extreme level. I don't wanna tell you what ISO settings we're at because it's gonna vary from camera to camera, and as these cameras get better, the ISOs keep expanding and expanding. So why don't we just show you what it looks like at the lowest ISO?
So we've been shooting at the low ISO. Looks great, very acceptable picture.
Yeah, at the lowest ISO, you're getting the cleanest type of video that you can possibly get out of your camera. That's a good place to be when you have a lot of light. So what we're gonna do now is go to a medium ISO setting of this camera.
Now this is an acceptable image, but we're starting to introduce a little bit of grain, a little bit of noise. This is probably the top of where I would push the ISO. After that, I'd probably think about bringing in lights.
Yeah, you guys have to remember that at this medium level, you're seeing the noise, you're seeing a little bit of grain, and we're gonna see what's gonna happen when we max out this camera right now.
At this max ISO, you're introducing a ton of grain, a ton of noise. You really don't want to be here unless you've actually found Bigfoot and you have to get the shot.
So what you're looking at right now, it's maxed out. Now remember, with still photography, when you go to higher ISOs, you're freezing that grain because it's a still image. But what you see right now, it looks like snow. The noise, the grain, it's flying all over the place. So this probably isn't a place where you want to be. So let's move on.
Todd here with another great tip. Check out your location at the time of day you plan on being there. It's a great way to see what the sound will be like and what the light will be like when you're shooting.
All right, so now we're gonna talk about resolution. This is one of the first things that you're gonna wanna set in your camera. It's kind of like you're gonna set it, you're gonna forget it. It's important, but there's a few different things we're gonna talk about the resolution, and what are some of those resolutions?
What they're gonna see is 480, 720, and 1080. Now 480 is a standard definition. That's an old format. That's the old television in your basement that nobody uses anymore.
Yeah, that you probably don't want to touch that at all. There's no reason to be dumbing it down that far. Just try not to do it.
The next one we'd have is 720. That's HD. That's a great format to be in. It's not the best, but it's still a great resolution. Sometimes you'll be forced to use 720 when you go to a higher frame rate, like 60 frames per second. Technical reasons, it'll dumb it down to 720. Still HD, great place to be. But now where you want to be is at 1080. 1080 is going to give you the maximum resolution, and it's going to give you a lot of options in post to do other things. If you need to deliver in 720 or 480 or anywhere in between, you can do that in post, but have the maximum resolution. That's going to give you a lot of options, a lot of leeway in post. If you need to crop, if you need to stabilize, if you need to go from a medium to a close-up, you've got all those options now because you shot at 1080.
Sure, and what's happening as technology changes, you're gonna start to see 2K and 4K resolutions, and probably somewhere after that. So whenever you're watching this, try to shoot at the higher resolution. One of the things that we wanna talk about with the resolution is that if you are shooting at, say, 480 for whatever weird reason, and you want it to be 1080, well, you can't go back up in resolution once you start down. I like to shoot at the highest resolution possible because if I need to dumb it down, I can. One other thing about shooting at 1080 or the higher resolutions, you have to be cognizant of what your memory cards can handle. So I wouldn't say that a good solution to saving space is dumbing down your resolution because cards are inexpensive. That's just one thing I like to say.
And you want to be future-proof. So shooting at the maximum resolution, you can guarantee maybe you're only putting it on YouTube right now and it's at 720, but maybe your stuff is so good it eventually ends up on a big screen where 1080 is going to look more beautiful.
And that's it. Shoot at the highest resolution, and we're moving on. Jared here with another tip. Before you start shooting for the day, make sure you reformat your memory cards so you start with a clean slate. Yellow ball, I got the yellow ball. Oh, all right, I think I ate the most balls there. So why are we using Hungry Hippos to demonstrate anything? Well, we're gonna get into frame rate. Our cameras have the ability to be set at different frame rates, and that's what Todd's gonna explain. So what are the different frame rates we're gonna be working with?
The general frame rates that everybody's gonna find in their cameras is 24 frames per second, 30 frames per second, and 60 frames per second.
So what you're saying is that at 24 frames, we have literally 24 individual still images and 30. There's 60 still frames that all make up the video?
That's exactly right.
So what is that giving us?
24 frames per second is going to give you that cinematic film look. It's going to give you a motion blur. We've all grown up watching movies shot at 24 frames per second, and a lot of guys tend to gravitate towards 24 frames just to imitate that look.
So that gives you a certain look that may be good for one thing, but maybe 30 is better for something else.
30 frames is going to give us a more realistic look. There's actually more frames there, capturing more action, but it's going to give you that video look.
So it's something similar to what we saw in the 80s and 90s when my mom had her Betamax?
Or even like a newscast. Even your iPhones, I believe, they shoot at 30 frames per second. It's definitely going to look a little more real. You're catching more frames per second, so you're capturing a little more motion. It's going to look a little cleaner, a little crisper. Your sporting events might be shot at 30 frames per second.
But it doesn't have that feel.
It doesn't give you that cinematic look that a lot of people like to have.
All right, so then 60 frames a second.
60 frames per second for what our purposes are is going to be used for slow motion. You can shoot 60 frames per second and play it back at 60 frames. That's going to be a real hyper-realistic look. That's what you're going to see watching the football game, your NFL games, your video games. A lot of that's 60 frames per second. But for most purposes, for filmmakers, you want to stick around that 24 frames per second and utilize 60 frames for your slow motion.
So basically 60 frames a second, it's going to give us the ability to have better slow motion. Why wouldn't we shoot slow motion with 24 frames?
Well, when you take the 60 frames and you put it in your editing software, it's probably going to be in a 24 frame timeline. That's going to give you more frames to slow down. It's going to give you a butter smooth slow motion. If you take 24 frames and decide later, oh, I'd love to have that in slow motion, it's going to actually duplicate frames, and it's going to give you a stuttery looking slow motion, not really as butter smooth as 60 frames is going to give you.
So then why wouldn't we shoot 60 frames all the time?
It sounds good in theory, but shooting 60 all the time is going to multiply all of your data by 2.5 times. You're going to eat up more cards, you're going to eat up more hard drives, and it's going to really tax your editing system at the end of the day. What you really want to do is shoot 24 when you need, shoot 60 when you need. If you're unsure about certain scenes, shoot it at 60. You can dump it back down to 24, but shooting 60 all the time is going to slow down your production, slow down your post-production, and time is money.
All right, Todd, so we've talked about the different frame rates. Now we want to demonstrate the 24 frames, the 30 frames, and 60 frames as it pertains here to Hungry Hungry Hippos. Before we jump into the frame rates, I want to remind you guys that we already have everything set. We're just focusing on what the frame rates are looking like right now. We'll get to every other individual piece of this puzzle later, but Todd, what are we starting with?
So what we're going to start with is 24 frames per second. That's going to give you that motion blur we talked about a little bit. I think it's going to be a little bit more pronounced once you see that, then see 60 and 30. But let's start off with 24. All right, and rolling, and action.
All right, Todd, let's watch the playback. Let's see what we have here.
When we play this back, you can see as the balls are flying around and the hippos are going, with all the action, you're seeing a little bit of motion blur with everything going around. It's not out of focus, but just the motion is blurring.
Right, so where you got your focus proper, it's still getting motion blur, but that has more to do with the frame rate.
Absolutely. So let's move on to 30 frames per second. I think that's where you're going to definitely see the difference in the motion blur. And recording, and action.
So what you're watching right now is a 24 frame timeline. So that means the video is being played back at 24 frames a second. We want to show you what 30 and 60 frames looks like, but we can't do that in a 24 frame timeline. So please refer to the files. The names are blinking up on the screen right now so that you can see what 30 frames a second looks like and 60 frames a second. All right, so now the hopes are that it's more sharp.
Absolutely. It's going to look a little more realistic here. And there's the playback. Now, as you can see here, it's definitely a little sharper. Everything looks a lot crisper.
All right, that's pretty cool. So I can only imagine that at 60 frames a second, it's going to be even more crisp.
Absolutely. But 60 is also going to give us the ability to just slow it down and get a butter smooth slow motion.
All right, let's try it out.
All right. Then we got our 60 and rolling and action.
All right, so let's see what 60 frames gives us at full speed first.
All right, here's 60 frames full speed. Boom.
Oh, so whereas before it wasn't looking, there was that motion blur at 24 and 30 started to lock it up more, 60 has even locked that up more. Everything looks extremely sharp and crisp.
Very, very crisp, very realistic. A great look for certain things, but most people still tend to gravitate towards the 24 frames for that cinematic look. Now, let me show you what it looks like when we slow it down, using the 60 frames down to a 24 playback. Now, as you can see, butter smooth slow motion. Really
so much
nice.
crisper.
Yep. Crisp image, very nice slow motion, something you're used to seeing cinematically when you think of slow motion.
So with that said, what we should try, let's slow the 24 frames a second one down and see how that looks.
Let's get back to that. So back here is our 24 frames, and here is slow motion now.
Oh, that's crazy.
Now, as you can see, it's got a stutter to it. It's got a lag. It's duplicating frames.
So basically what's happening is it's not as crisp and clean as if you shot it full on at 60 frames a second. So remember that out there. If you know you're going to be doing slow motion, you're going to want to start off at the 60 frames a second so that you can slow it down. Because if you try to slow down to 24 frames a second, it just doesn't look as professional or as clean. So what we've seen here, you've seen your 24 frames, you've seen your 30, and you've seen your 60. You've also seen slow motion done in different ways. What we're trying to show you here are the different options that you have so that you can determine what's going to work best for you. Now, like Todd mentioned earlier, 24 frames a second seems to be what the industry standard is, or where most people like to shoot to get that cinematic feel. But it's up to you when you're shooting to determine if you want that 30 or that 60, and that's why we gave you that demonstration right here. So Todd, let's move on to the next thing.
Let's do it. Todd here with one more tip. Scout your location for power and electric. You're gonna need a lot of juice for all this gear.
All right, so now we're gonna talk about white balance. This is another one of those settings that you wanna get right off the bat. You don't wanna have to worry about doing this in post-production. So, Todd, what is white balance pretty much doing?
White balance is keeping your whites white, and then in essence, every other color is accurate.
Yeah, that's pretty good. And you know, there's a couple of different ways to set this. You have custom white balance settings. You have settings that the cameras have that they're called presets. Is that correct, Todd?
No, you're absolutely right. And there's a number of settings in camera to help you do that. One of the first ones you'll find though is auto. Auto's not really where you want to be. The camera doesn't know what's important, where you do know what's important in your scene. So it's going to be best for you to set your own white balance.
Yeah, auto is one of those things that the camera can be thrown off. It may be good in certain situations, but it's certainly not the best in all. So what's the lighting setup that we have right now?
Well, the bulbs we have are daylight, and our cameras are set to daylight. Under the daylight setting, you've got your cloudy and you've got your shady. That's just a variation of the daylight. So as of right now, our whites are white.
Right, so if we popped up this white card, we would see that everything should be pretty white.
Absolutely. Now, we also have some other variations in here. We've got some tungsten bulbs in here. So let's switch to tungsten so we can kind of show what's gonna happen while we're still in daylight settings on the camera.
Sure.
Boom. So we are awash in a beautiful orange glow.
Right, so basically what's switched here is we just changed the light to tungsten balanced light, but left the camera set to the daylight white balance. So what would we do here to get the proper white balance?
I mean, we have tungsten lights on now, so we should switch our camera to tungsten.
All right, so let's do that.
All right. Boom. And there we have it. Our whites are white.
They are. Let's check it out. Yes? Can I get a thumbs up? Yep, the thumbs up there. Good. So what's next, Todd?
Well, since we're set to tungsten now, I'd like to show everybody what the light would look like if we would switch these back to daylight. So guys, can I see daylight once again? Boom. And now we are blue.
Yeah, and let's hold up that white card, which probably isn't very white. It's coming up a little on the blue side. So yeah, in order to correct this, we would just go back to the daylight setting. But what's next, Todd?
Well, there are gonna be situations where you've got mixed lights. You're gonna have daylight coming through the window, and you might have tungsten from a light bulb on a lamp here. So let's show that, guys. Let's get tungsten over here and daylight over here and get a mix of light in here, and then we'll deal with that. Bam.
There we go.
So we've got a mix of light here. Now we have to deal with that. We have to do a custom white balance for this, and it'll basically average the two color temperatures.
Right, so to do a custom setting, you would have your camera take a picture of this white card to give you the setting that it thinks it should be. So let's go and check that out. All right, so it looks a little better, Todd, but it's not exactly where we want it to be. What are we gonna do?
Yeah, it's still a little bit off. So what you can actually do is you can manually dial in the Kelvin on this and finesse it to get it where you want it to be and get your whites a little closer to white. So there we go. This is probably as close as we're gonna get in a mixed light situation.
Sure, is there anything else you wanted to touch base on?
Well, the only other thing we didn't talk about that you might find in your settings is the fluorescence setting. You go into an office building, you got your fluorescent lights in the ceiling, you might see a green hue on your subject. There is a setting in the camera just for that. If you come across it, flip that switch and your whites will be white.
Sure, that's what it's about, guys. This white balance is very important, but the camera manufacturers have given you some good presets to go with. So if those presets don't work well, you can do your custom white balance or your custom Kelvin temperatures and just dial it in for yourself. So, you ready?
Let's do it.
Move on. Here we are with another tip. Always have a bunch of tools on hand. You never know when you need to fix something. All right, so now let's talk about picture styles in your cameras. Now, when I'm shooting RAW for still photos, I'm able to tweak some of that stuff later. I don't really worry about it in the camera as much, but when you're shooting video, the file that you're doing gets baked into your image. So it's kind of like a JPEG when you're shooting stills, but what are the things that are a part of picture style?
The variables that you have control over are sharpness, contrast, saturation, and color tone.
Sure, and those things are very important to get right, and that's what we want to talk to you about here is making sure that those settings are set in your camera if that's what you want, but some people like to have them flat.
Well, when you shoot flat, you have more control in post-production over all of those variables, the saturation, the color, the contrast, and whatnot. But you may not have the ability to do all that because of time constraints, budget constraints. It's really a personal preference.
Sure, and when I'm doing my videos, I think 100% of them I have shot with the settings proper in the camera when it comes to my picture style because I want to shoot and move on, especially for my YouTube videos. So what are some of the picture styles we're going to run through?
Well, we're going to first go with some of the presets like portrait, landscape, standard, faithful, neutral, monochrome. And then we're also going to get into the user-defined section where you can actually go in and tweak the saturation, the color, the contrast, the color tone. And we'll actually max those out so we can see what those are doing individually and see them at the extremes.
All right, guys, this is good to get right. This is good to watch. So just check this out, see what you think works best for yourself. But the whole point here is to remember that it gets baked into your file. You're either going to leave it flat or you're going to try to get it as right in the camera as possible. Let's do those examples. So we've assumed the test example positions for picture styles right now, and what you're looking at is faithful. And Todd, have you been faithful lately?
I'm faithful all the time if you ask my wife.
Oh, that's true. That's true. So I hope is she going to watch this?
I don't know.
So what you're looking at right now is the example of what faithful looks like. It's a pretty good representation, and you have to remember that it's going to be different for the different brands of cameras, so it all depends on what you have. They may name it one thing, you may name it another. Plus, if you like the way faithful looks, but you want to tweak just one thing, you can go in there and tweak individual little settings of each thing. So let's get on to the next one. Yep, so now we are set to picture style standard. Todd, what's going on here?
Well, don't let the name fool you. Standard is actually sharper, a little crisper than what we were just looking at in faithful.
So basically the sharpness went up just a little bit, but you guys can see what's going on the screen right now. Is it the 1950s or are we just in black and white, Todd?
We are in black and white. We're actually in monochrome.
Yeah, so you have the option to set your camera in monochrome, which takes away all of the color information. But honestly, this is one of those things that I would say try to do in post. And now we've maxed out the sharpness. I probably look so sharp right now that I could cut through glass. How about you, Todd? He's sleeping. So Todd's not cutting through glass, he's cutting through the air. But you don't want to max this stuff out. This is something you want to be very careful about, and that's sharpness, because if you're shooting a bride and you overdo it, your footage is going to be lost. This is one thing that you want to play it safe. Don't over sharpen. Try to get it pretty close, but pull back just a little bit. And now we've maxed out the contrast. My hair is almost totally black. It's gone. It's like a black hole. What else is going on here, Todd?
Well, we've crushed the blacks with the contrast so high. Now, I crush a lot. I'd rather do it in post because you don't want to have this baked in.
Yeah, this is just one of those things. Be very, very careful with your contrast. And now we've maxed out the saturation. We kind of look like cartoon characters. Look at my face. Look at Todd's face. Yeah, this could work in some situations, but that's for you to figure out.
Do it in post.
So now we've taken the tone all the way down to the bottom, and it has more of a magenta shift. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, this is definitely a stylistic thing. And again, probably better off doing it in post.
And with tone, it's one of those things that you're going to tweak subtly, but we're just maxing it out. Now let's max it out the other way. Now we're maxed out this way on the green shift. You see it more green? That's right. We've shifted one way, we've shifted the other way, and now we're going to shift some more.
I feel like Neo.
And now we are maxed out to the max. It's over the top. There is probably never a situation where you will be using this, but yeah, we're maxed out.
To the max.
And here we are, super duper fantastically flat. That's right, doesn't look like very much, but Todd, would you like to edit this in post?
It would be time consuming. And most projects, they don't have the budget for that. So I usually like to shoot what I see with my eye in camera.
That's right, guys. You've just seen a ton of examples of a lot of different picture styles, and we've maxed it out and minused it out. We've taken it all over the place, so you've gotten to see what it looks like. Now it's up to you to decide which ones you want to use and when.
Todd here with another quick tip. Have a solution to mark every one of your cards when they're full after you've shot.
Glass, 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 glass. Yep, that's something that I say quite often because lenses are extremely important when it comes to photography and shooting video. Now, I want you to remember that if you just start out with a kit lens, there is nothing wrong with starting out with something like that. But as you grow, remember that lenses go with you for many, many years, where bodies are replaced as they basically come out with new ones. So there's a lot of different options you can go with, but there's a difference. You have zoom lenses and fixed lenses. What are the pros and cons to those, Todd?
Primes are really good because they're really fast, and a lot of people will tell you, oh, you always need the nifty 50. And they're great. They're really, really sharp. They're really fast, which means good in low light. But the only hang up with those is you're a one-man band. You don't have an assistant camera person to keep feeding you lenses. So when you're on a tight deadline and you need to get the shot, I prefer to have a zoom lens. Maybe a 24-70 or a 70-200, something like that. Or even this kit lens, which is the 18-135. So I can go from a close-up to a wide real quick.
So basically what that's letting you do, if you're shooting an interview and you simply do a tight head shot and then you want to come back and get a wider shot, instead of having to switch lenses and finding the right, basically changing everything, you have the ability to go ahead and just zoom and get exactly what you're looking for.
Exactly right. And you just have more options with a zoom. The only downside is they will be slower than a prime. And primes, they're a little bit sharper.
So we have the different lenses, but there's also the options. You've got manual and you've got auto, as well as image stabilization. What is this all about?
Yeah, the autofocus is something people may be familiar with from the photography world. That's not really something you get into in the video world, only because focus is a real stylistic thing. You may want to pull focus from the person back here to the person in the foreground. You need to really be able to control that. That autofocus is not going to know that. And how you control that and what you do we'll get into when we get into follow focuses and all the other gear. But manual is where you're going to live.
So even if you're running around, running and gunning, you're trying your best. And I guess that's where we'll get into more detail about apertures and how that plays an effect in how you make sure that your focus can be tack sharp.
So basically you're going to be living and dying in manual focus. Now the other thing you mentioned was stabilization. That's going to be critical as well. You said running and gunning. If you're running and gunning with a non-stabilized lens, your image is going to be all over the place. That stabilization is going to be critical to get a nice, stable image.
So a lot of people say, oh, I'll just fix it in post. Now that's an option that you can do digitally, but what I like to say in everything is if you can get it right in the camera, you're gonna save yourself a lot of time in post-production, and it actually holds true more in video than it does in still images. It's much easier to fix things in post when it comes to one single frame, but when you start adding thousands and thousands of frames, you get into longer rendering times. Just, it changes the whole game. So try to get it as right in the camera as possible, and then you're gonna be a hell of a lot better off.
And with stabilization, if you do it in post, what happens is it crops your image because it's got to go in to stabilize it, so it's got to trim a little bit off the edges. So you're going to lose some of your shot.
So that brings us up to things like filters. You've got UV filters, you have circular polarizers, as well as neutral density. What do you want to talk about those?
Well, first and foremost, the UV filter. A lot of people do put UV filters on their lenses just to protect them. Digital cameras aren't really that sensitive to UV, so they're not really necessary for that function, but a lot of people do put them on to protect the lenses. Now you do have to be aware that you might get flares, but you know, you make an investment in a big piece of glass, you may want to protect it with something.
If you're going to use a UV filter, which I personally do not for stills or for video, you want to make sure that you buy the best piece of glass that you can in terms of a filter. They are out there, but remember, they're more expensive. So if you're going to have a good piece of glass and you put a bad filter on it, you're basically taking away from the quality of your lens.
So another filter we have is a neutral density filter. That's really important.
Sure, that's something that I've just started to discover, is that how important a neutral density filter is. It's basically cutting down on the amount of light that's entering the camera so that you can use the right aperture that you're looking for. So we have the variable neutral density filter, and then that brings us up to a polarizer. Todd, with video, what's important with the polarizer?
With the polarizer, it's just kind of like a pair of sunglasses. It's going to reduce the glare, cut down on reflections, and saturate the colors a bit, make the blues a little brighter.
So basically, it's gonna boomify it.
Exactly right.
So as you guys see, there's a lot of different options out here. Sure, it may be basic for some people, but this is still very important for people just getting started, as well as people that have already had their cameras. So now let's move on to the next thing, Todd.
Sounds good. Todd here with another tip. I love zoom lenses. So use a zoom lens, but don't zoom while you're shooting. It looks amateur.
Supports, that's what we have right here, because with video, stability is extremely important. You're not gonna hand hold everything. And honestly, I've seen this. Can I borrow this for a minute?
Absolutely.
I've seen the old, we don't have a strap on this because most people don't shoot with straps, but oh, look at me, I'm shooting video from up here and I'm stabilizing it by holding the strap. That's not stabilizing anything. It's just not. So here, have that back. So laid out in front of you, we're gonna run through just the differences between some of these. They don't have to be expensive, but they can be very expensive.
I mean, support is critical to a professional looking video. If we were to take this camera and we had no other option but to shoot, you'd be here and maybe you'd tuck your arms. But even if I do this, look how shaky I am.
Right, and also keep in mind, the more you zoom out, the more focal length you have with your lenses, the less stable it's gonna be, because that's what's going to happen.
Exactly.
So if you need to do handheld, what are some options that you have for stabilizers?
If you're looking for a handheld look, then you want to get something like a shoulder mount. There are some inexpensive options for shoulder mounts. There's one over here. Again, you're still pulling focus on the lens, so you're sacrificing some stability there. You're going to get some shake from that. A better option is a more robust shoulder mount like this. You've got grips, you've got the shoulder mount, but then you also have a follow focus off to the side that's going to keep your shot a lot more stable.
So really, this is just pretty much a catch-all. You can do everything to get your stability, your follow focus. It's going to keep your images nice and still, but there is still one more thing that you can do with this setup.
Yes, I can actually take this off here, fold this up, take this right over to my tripod, and pop this right onto here. Now I've got even more stability. I've got the tripod at work here. I've got the follow focus at work. And this here is the ultimate in stability.
So moving on, I want to talk about just a normal photo tripod. Look, this is the normal type of tripod that you may use for your still images. It has this type of head on it, but that's not very smooth. So this may not be the best option. Then you can move into something that has a video head on it. This is a video head. Just look how much more smooth it is. So that's great for still images and maybe something where you're not having a lot of movement, but this is more ideal when you start moving into video. So Todd, talk about that big boy over there.
What you're really getting out of these bigger tripods is you have a fluid head. These are definitely beefier. They've got a smoother tilt and pan. Also, you're going to get into legs that are more substantial. When you start adding follow focuses and monitors and different accessories onto this, you need a lot more support. You put a big rig on a smaller tripod like this, all of a sudden your legs start sinking.
So Todd, you just said fluid head. Can you explain a little more what that is?
Sure, this head here, it's got fluid inside of it. So when you're panning and tilting, it's just got a much smoother look to it.
You see how much smoother that is? When you come back to something like this, it's just herky-jerky, it's not smooth, and it's just one of those options that it's going to make the end viewer much happier. That's an expensive tripod, but I have something more like this, which is kind of a good option for running and gunning. It's a monopod with a fluid head on top. This is very good because it can stand on its own. Of course, you want to be there just a little bit, just in case it tilts or falls, but you still have the ability to do the smooth motion. It's just so much better and smooth. It's like silk. It's like silky clean, but You want to remember that when it comes to supports, like anything else, if you buy quality first, you don't have to replace it later. So if you can afford it, get the best that you can get at the time, you're going to be much happier that you don't have to replace it in the long run. So that's about it from there. Let's move on. Let's make like a fluid head and swim away. Here we go with another tip. When you have a tripod, it has a plate. Make sure you always have that plate before you get out on your shoot. So Todd, you've been mentioning things about follow focus, and I think that's something important to dive in deeper. So Todd, talk about follow focus.
This is a standard follow focus setup. And what it essentially does is it gets your hand off the barrel and gets it over here into a more comfortable position. And by getting your hand off the barrel, it allows the camera to stay more stable.
Which we showed that it's pretty unstable when you're trying to hold it like this, your arms are flapping around, and that's not what you want.
Absolutely not, yeah. When it comes to focus, it's really a part of your storytelling. You're telling people what's important by what you focus in on.
So I've seen that with movies. Like when you see the behind the scenes looks, people are always pulling focus to where they want it, and we see it all day long when these guys are shooting us. It's really critical to get your focus tack sharp, like we've said a bunch of times, and this is something that's simple, easy to use, and definitely gives you more stability.
It's a pretty simple system. You've got a rail system on the base here that attaches to your tripod and to your camera. Then you've got the gear here that slides right on here, lines up to this focus ring on your lens.
So basically you can get different sizes for different focal length lenses that allow you to just pull the focus from one lens to the other.
Absolutely. Push them together. Simple as that.
So that just allows you to put your hands off to the side, again, making it more stable. Is there a way that you can mark your follow focus?
Absolutely. On the side here, you've got this little white section over here, and then you can take a dry erase marker, make a mark there. That's my focus. I'm going to pull it over to here. Boom. Now I can hit this focus flawlessly back and forth. So having something like this where you can make marks and hit your focus every time is critical.
So for example, if there was a couple sitting at a table talking about rings or whatnot, you would have it preset so that you know where it's going.
He might put the ring out to her. We'd rack focus from the ring to her face, get the expression. It's a very cinematic look.
Think about that. When you're just starting out, this may not be the best option to start with, but know that it exists. Now there's something that's pretty darn inexpensive that you can use that it may not be perfect, but you can simply wrap that around the lens. It tightens on there, and now you have sort of like a focusing ring that you can just pull from the side, up and down. Now, it's not the best in the world, but it's an option that you can start with until you can invest money in something like this. So there are some newer options out there with some of the new cameras that allow you to actually touch the LCD screen to help move focus. Now that changes what we said a little bit earlier about staying in manual focus. We like being in manual, but this newer option, it's interesting. What do you think about it?
It is an autofocus, but the input is still manual. The camera's not deciding what's important in the shot. You're still deciding what's critical to your story. So you're sitting here and you're touching to tell the camera what's most important. The only downside I would say to that is as you're touching, I'm bumping this camera, and that may cause some stability issues.
Sure, so it's pretty similar to racking your focus, because with those blue marks that are on the side, you may go from this point to this point. The same thing's happening on the LCD screen where you're touching the LCD screen in one spot or the other, and the focus is racking. So we thought that was pretty important to talk about, but obviously investing in something like this as soon as you can, any type of follow focus, is really a good option because it's going to make you look more professional. It's going to help you get more professional results. And what if you want to get it more fine-tuned?
Well, this little toy here, it's called a whip, connects into here. And it will allow you, again, when you've got this camera in an odd position, maybe it's up on a crane, maybe it's down low, maybe you just need to be away from the camera for whatever reason, you can be away and pull focus out here, and again, looking at your marks, you know exactly where you are. You don't even need to look at the monitor to know you're hitting your focus.
So that's pretty cool. That's a wired way to do it. Now they offer wireless options. Now those you're getting to extremely expensive most of the time. A lot of movie sets use them, but they seriously have wireless. Basically a knob, you sit there, you turn it, and the mechanism turns on the camera. But it's important that you have a pretty good fit with whatever you're using.
Yeah, the ones they use on movie sets are very expensive, $20,000+. There are more inexpensive ones, but what I've found in my experience is that there's a slight lag to them, and sometimes they're a little jittery depending on the model. I'd be more prone to rely on something that is set up like this. If you're gonna go wireless, you gotta go big to really get the reliability.
So there you guys have it. Those are just some simple options, some expensive, some inexpensive, to help you get a follow focusing system. This is really good when you want to get that tack sharp focus. Plus, it's a little more comfortable and you look kind of more professional when you've got something along these lines. So there you have it. Moving on. Here's another tip. Don't forget that many cameras allow you to magnify the preview to make sure that you get tack sharp focus. So Todd, we've got things on the table that are going to be good for camera movement, because camera movement is important. I know that when I made some of my early videos, I had zero camera movement, and Todd is here to show us what we have on the table and tell us the importance of what it can be used for.
We got some great things here and things that I've put to use in many of my videos to really just up the production value.
Because a lot of people will just set up sticks, which is easy to do, and you can do some movement left and right and up and down with the fluid heads like we talked about, but this is going to give us a more dynamic look, something that's going to set you apart, like you just said, from other people who aren't doing this. And it doesn't really have to be overly expensive. It just gives you another option. So what do we have sitting here?
This is a Glide Cam. That's the brand, but it's like a mini Steadicam.
And there's a bunch of different companies that make them.
All kinds, all price points. And what it allows you to do is this device balances the camera here in a way that stabilizes your camera so you can move anywhere around and have a nice smooth shot. Really great for following talent or objects in a scene.
Sure, so it allows you to like walk around people. You could use it in a house walkthrough because it keeps everything, like you said, stable. And we talked about the importance of stability, because if you're shaking and you want to correct that in post, it's going to mess with your images. This allows you to have a smooth, clean video of whatever you're doing.
Yeah, where a lot of this stuff works best, lens-wise, is with a wide lens. You can't really pull focus when you're running around with something like this. So if you've got a wide lens, it'll cut down on the shake. You won't notice the movement as much, and everything will stay in focus, and it'll just be a better shot. The same thing with any of these other things. Wide angle lenses really kind of help to accentuate the space and accentuate the movement that you're actually doing.
Sounds good. What do we have right here?
This is a car mount, which is really, you look at this, these are 3 suction cups. It's basically a suction cup tripod that you're going to put right on the car, whether it be on the hood or inside, to get you that classic car shot driving down the road, whether you're rapping or singing or talking to your neighbor.
So it lets you could point it in the car through the windshield, which a polarizing filter would probably come in handy to cut down on the glare.
You got it.
You could shoot it out away from the car so you can see the car scenes. You could put it on the back if you were chasing or somebody was chasing behind. So there's a lot of different options that you can use for something like this, and you trust it?
Yeah, I actually have ratchet straps and things that'll actually secure it down. I mean, it's always something to keep in mind. I mean, you're gonna be putting an expensive device on this and anything can happen. So another option, if you really don't want to risk your main camera, might be a GoPro. You wouldn't be able to put a nice lens on a GoPro, so everything you're shooting is wide, but it's a good option.
Sure, but sometimes you want to use the best gear that you have with the lens that you have, so using the GoPro may not be the best option. It will give you a look, but when I want to shoot with really good gear, I want to use that gear. So that's why do not cheap out on something like a car mount, because if you're driving down the road and that thing flies off, you're SOL and you're out a whole lot of different stuff. So we have something right here that's a slider. How does this work?
This is basically like a little dolly system. You know, you see on the big movies, they got the tracks and they're pushing the guys back and forth on the dolly tracks. This is a similar thing, except just a small version. You know, you pop this off of here, drop this on here. It's gonna give you movement, and it's great when you've got something in the foreground. A lot of these things, when you put an element in the foreground with a nice wide angle lens, you come off of like a wall here to reveal an alleyway where your talent's coming down. Really dramatic, cinematic things that you can do with very little. You might set this up for one shot to open up your scene and you're done, but it's added so much value to what you've got that it's worth its weight in gold.
So it's pretty simple. Not only can you slide left and right, but then you can have the fluid head right here so that you can go up and down and left and right. So we have one more thing over here, but let's talk about the quick plate.
Well, what I put on all of these, and it's a bit of an investment, but again, if you're this one-man band, time is of the essence. So you could easily pop this off of here, I can pop it on here, and over here we've got a jib or a crane, and I can literally come over here and pop this on easily, and I'm off to another shot already.
So that's really important, to have the same mount from one tripod to a glide cam to a slider is going to save you a lot of time. So when you're on that shoot and you're just that one-man band like Todd was saying, you can bounce from one to the next without slowing down and having people wait for you to change out, look for some coins to make some changes. So how does this jib work?
Well, it's a balancing act here. When you've got it close to being balanced, you actually have some things like this. You'll see if I take this off, we actually lose our balance a little bit.
But that could give you a nice raise for a certain type of shot.
I mean, at a standing position, you really want it to just kind of be still. You don't really want it moving, so you want to control this for the most part. But again, if I were to come off this table to reveal a poker game, it would be really dramatic, really cinematic, and really add a lot of value to your shoot.
So when you say reveal, it's a great opening shot.
Absolutely.
It establishes the scene and it gives you some movement into the scene that just draws the viewer in, and which we'll get into when we get into more examples of what we're shooting.
Absolutely. It can take you in and it can even take you out. So we could come up, watch this poker game play out, and as it wraps up, we go out here and we fade to black under this table.
Cool. So what you guys have seen right here are simple ways that we can use camera movement. And you may notice that we are using these when we're filming the video right now. We use a lot of these different options that we're talking about, so you may pick up on that as the guide goes on. But again, all this stuff, great for a one-man band. And Todd, thank you. Let's move on to the next thing.
Let's do it. Todd here with just a tip. Make sure you rebalance jibs and glide cams with any change of a lens.
So now let's talk about monitors. Monitors are extremely important because your camera may only have up to a 3-inch screen, some of them 3.2 inches, and in the future they may get larger, but that's very small and hard to see. Todd, on your camera you have something unique to just a few digital SLRs on the market.
This camera right here has an articulating screen. Some of the models do have this. I find it very useful for video, especially when you've got it on a shoulder mount or on a slider or on a crane where you're at an awkward angle. Twist that screen, you can see your shot, you can monitor properly. If that's an option on your camera, I find it to be an asset.
So with monitors, what are you looking for when you're previewing? Well, you want to get your focus as tack sharp as possible. As Todd knows, I talk about tack sharp quite often, and this is one thing that you want to do. But being that it's such a small screen, what options do you have to magnify it? Well, we've got a few here. This is an inexpensive option. It's called a loop. It magnifies the back of the screen, which gives you the ability to see your focus to make sure that it's tack sharp. It's kind of like back in the day when you would preview negatives or slides, you would have something like this. That goes up against the screen like this, or if it's seated and you don't have an articulating screen, it goes here, and this part goes into the hot shoe. It can flip out of the way to do stills, but it allows you to get your eye up in there to make sure that you're tack sharp with your video. And one other thing that I didn't mention is that when you're using a loop outside, it's not just for the tack sharp focus, but it allows you to shoot in bright daylight because you can block all of the extra light coming in, put this right up against a viewfinder so that you can view it much easier to make sure that you get that tack sharp focus. But it's still pretty small, so what's the other option that you have right here?
Obviously up here we've got a larger monitor. This thing is just more real estate. Let me plug this thing in. You simply go in through your HDMI out over here, and boom, you've got all this real estate to check your focus, to check your composition. And it's also great when you're on set with a client and they can monitor here as opposed to being over your shoulder on this tiny little screen. The only thing that I would warn is be careful relying on this for your color and your exposure. Sometimes they can be a little bit off. Now you can go in and you can try to color balance everything so they match exactly, but what I usually do is I'll get my frame, check my focus. This looks pretty cool. I'll pull this out, just double check my color down here. I found this to be a little more true to what's actually being captured in the camera. And then I'll utilize this for focus and composition. And another great thing, you'll see we have this on the camera, but you could pull this off the camera and say when you've got this camera on a jib and it's 15 feet high up in the air, it's really difficult to monitor the camera up there. Here, you can run an HDMI cord down to yourself, monitor right from here as you operate the jib. Perfect.
Boom. So that's really cool to have all that extra real estate, especially if the camera's high up on a jib. You now put it right in front of your face. That's what it's all about. So that's much better than using a smaller LCD because it's going to make it easier to get tack sharp images as well as make sure that you do not have anything distracting in the background. Beyond that, it's going to help you with the client. Instead of leaning over your shoulder to check out the video after it's shot, they can look at a larger screen. So it makes you look more professional, but it also allows you to just, see everything a little bit better. Is that right, Todd?
Yeah, one other thing I'd point out, you mentioned about blocking the sun and seeing out in bright sunlight with the eyepiece. Similar here, nothing worse than having a nice big monitor out on a bright sunny day and you can't see a thing. Throw this little sunshade on here and it'll block the sun. You can see what you're supposed to be doing.
Another great thing about having a monitor like this and not using the small one is you may be able to check your background to make sure that there are no, as Todd would say, bogeys floating around. You may not be able to see them on a small screen. On a larger screen, you can see those distractions and catch them before it's too late. So those are some great options that you have. Something like this, which is inexpensive and allows you to get that tack sharp focus, to something that is a larger monitor. I like having the monitor because you can sit off to the side as a one-man band and do an interview but still see the screen. You could also check for the background to make sure there's nothing distracting back there, as well as making sure that your focus is still tack sharp. So those are a bunch of different options that you can have. It's up to you to decide what works best for you. That's about it. Let's move on to the next thing.
Sounds great.
Jared here with another tip. Make sure you know your gear before you get out on a shoot. You don't want to look like you don't know what you're doing. So they said, Todd, let there be light, and that is one of the most important things in videography as well as photography, of course. So you first start off with just daylight. I mean, when I first started shooting, I had no extra lights in anywhere. I relied on whatever was up in the sky, whether it was a bright day, not a bright day. That's what I shot with. But you obviously want to get better. You want to fill in lights. You want to control your lighting environment more so because you don't know what the sun's going to do other than continually move. So lighting is extremely important.
Without a doubt, because even as sensitive as these cameras are to light, you're still going to need light in certain situations.
Yeah, before we jump into these extra lights here, what are some ways that we can wrangle the sun and utilize it for our benefit?
The best way to do that is with a bounce. You're going to have something like this. You might have a white or reflective surface. I go here, I kick it up to you a little bit. I mean, you can even see with some of our studio lights here that I'm kicking some light up on your face. That's one way that doesn't require something to be plugged in to control the light that you have available.
So basically, if you're having an interview with somebody and you have it laid on the ground or you have it propped up on a light stand, that could give a nice fill light into their face. But if we want to not use the sun, because sometimes you're indoors, you may use the bulbs that are in a room, a simple lamp, and there's options, there's times to use that. But let's jump into some of the options we have to add our own light.
Well, the first thing we have over here are some on-camera options. You know, we talk about the one-man band and the running and gunning. Having something on camera can be beneficial. Up front here, take this thing off here, is a ring light, and inside we have a ring of LED lights.
So basically, this seems like a very harsh light. Is there a situation where you would want to use this?
If you wanted a contrasty look, hard shadows, hard light, that may be a stylistic choice you want to make, but if this is the only light you have in a situation, you may need every ounce of power to light whatever you're lighting. So you can crank this up and get the most out of it.
So what I like about these different options, they run on a rechargeable battery. So it's cool to have that. Of course, you need to get extra rechargeable batteries to make sure that you're ready to go because you don't get a ton of time out of it, but this thing really puts out a lot of light. So what is great about the ring light is not only does it work in this situation, but you could always take it off. You could hold it off to the side while you're filming or interviewing, or you could set it up on a light stand with a whole different option. Same thing plays for this one. You can actually connect two of these together to have multiple units going. And then Todd, they come with this more orangey looking thing. What's that for?
Well, these lights as they come are daylight.
Daylight in terms of the color temperature, which we're going to get into as we move on. We're going to talk about the difference between Kelvin temperature, which is you have your daylight, you have your tungsten, and we're going to show you the differences and where you use one versus the other, or just use both.
Yeah, because on camera right now, both of these lights, the light is going to look white because we're actually shooting daylight.
Because we have a lot of windows behind us.
Exactly.
So you want to balance it because if you didn't, it would probably come up with two different colors.
Right, so in the instance that you're shooting inside and there's tungsten light around, maybe your standard light bulb in the lamp.
The 4-footers in the ceiling.
Exactly. You may need to put this on so you can match your color temperature and make it tungsten. And you can see, looking here, this is going to look really orange. Now, if we would switch these cameras to tungsten setting, this light here would be white and these would be blue.
So these are some cool options. What do we have next?
Right next door here, we have a RE650. This is a tungsten hot light. These are somewhat antiquated at this point. A lot of folks are moving to the LEDs. The reason is this runs very, very hot and it sucks a lot of power.
So when you say hot light, you mean that it's literally hot, whereas the LEDs come off as more of a cool feel because they don't get as hot as this.
This thing's hot.
This is bright. I remember using this during one of my last video guides where it was set behind me. It was meant to be the sun, and I can tell you it is really hot. These things were used on a lot of movie sets, but it seems to be more antiquated now.
Absolutely. You mentioned about picking up that ring light and carrying it around. You could never do that with this light. Anytime you handle this light, once it's on, you've got to have gloves, otherwise you'll burn yourself. This whole system here becomes very, very hot. The only plus that this light has is you can actually focus this light. You can flood it or you can spot it. That's definitely an advantage that it has over some of these other options that are more of a floodlight.
As a one-man band, this probably isn't the best option for multiple reasons. It doesn't run on batteries, so you need to have a lot of power to plug into. It's really hot, it's fragile, so it may not be the best option for you. Let's see what else we have, Todd.
Over here we have some Kino Flows, and they have fluorescent bulbs in here, and they come in both tungsten and daylight.
Now, I personally like to use the daylight bulbs for where we're at right now. In my place, we have a lot of daylight that comes in, so that's why I stick with those. But you then have the options of having the tungsten balance lights because you never know when they're going to come in handy.
Absolutely. And you know, you mentioned the tungsten lights. If we pop this off over here.
What is this?
This is a gel. Like similar to what we had with the LEDs, we had the little plates to put on them to change the color temperature. This again is going to change our color temperature. And you'll see with this right here, I put this blue up and it helps to change this light to make it look more white.
So I figure the same thing's gonna happen on the daylight bulb if you use the tungsten balance
Absolutely.
option. So this is a really cool option. I love the Kinos. Other than being extremely expensive, maybe you could rent them on a shoot if you do need them, especially as a one-man band. Don't forget that rentals, that's a good quick tip. But I just wanted to show you what this option can do because it's pretty important to see what everything is. So what else do we have over to this side?
Over here, we have the big brother of the ring light. It's a panel light, again, filled with LEDs, runs cool, very efficient, runs off of batteries, very mobile, could pick this up and run around with it. Great, great option.
Yeah, I like using these on my shoots because they're light, they're powerful. It's perfect for a one-man band. Not terribly too expensive, just great to have. I think it's one of the best options around. So that's a bunch of different options that you have going from one light to the next. So let's move on to the next thing.
Todd here with one more tip. When researching new gear, try renting it before you make a big purchase.
So we've shown you a lot of different lights that you can use for your setups, but we haven't shown an actual setup, and Todd's gonna tell us about a simple one right here.
We're gonna do a classic setup called a 3-point lighting scheme. It's got your key, it's got your fill, and it's got your hair light.
So what I want you guys to know is that we've already locked in the settings for the camera. This isn't about the settings of the camera and what lens and all of that. It's all about the lighting. So Todd, what are we doing here?
First thing we're gonna do is we're gonna turn on our key light. That's our main source of light. It's gonna be the strongest light in the whole scene. So let's turn that on and see what it looks like.
So while Todd's doing that, I wanna let you know that if you just have one setup, I know that this is called 3-point lighting, but we want you to know that with just one light, you can still make this happen. We just want to show you that 1, 2, 3 lights and how that all works together, just so that you have an idea that you can build off of that for the future.
So as you can see right here, we've got the one light on. This is our key light. It's the only source of light, and it's really harsh on her. You got some shadows here on her nose and on her cheek, and it's not the most flattering light.
So what if you only have one light to work with?
If we only had one light, I'd pick up the light and I'd swing it around to kind of fill those shadows in a little bit more.
All right, let's see it.
All right.
And by the way, Todd has a diffuser in front of this light, and what that does is it softens up the light to make Maria look as good as she already looks.
So with that one light now, we've filled her face in a little bit and she looks nicer. We got rid of those shadows, but unfortunately, the light looks a little flat. There's no dimension to her face, and if this is all you had, it would be perfectly acceptable, but we've got more lights and I think we should use them.
Cool, so what's up next after this?
Well, the next light we would have would be the fill light. Now that, instead of us moving that light around to fill in that side of her face, we've got a dedicated light to help fill in those shadows. Now this fill light won't be as strong as your key light. We want to just make those shadows a little less harsh.
All right, so let's see what happens when we add that fill light.
You got it.
So remember that. Todd just said that, if you just have one light, it is acceptable. You have to start somewhere, but it is important that you do have one light when you're starting, because if you're in a dark area like this, you have to make it happen any way possible. So let's see it, Todd.
So there we have it. Now that's filling in the shadows. It's not as powerful as our key. You still have some shadow in dimension, but it's not as harsh. It's a little more flattering, softens the image, and looks a lot better.
So what would happen if we balance the key light and the fill light?
Let me show you.
All right. So by balancing this, I just want you to see what's going to happen. If we have the even light, same as the right, as the left, what's it going to look like, just so that you guys get to see and feel a little bit of a difference here.
Now there we have it. And again, it's similar to how when we brought the key light over to the center and shot it straight on, it's kind of a flat light. There's no drama, there's no depth, no dimension.
So it doesn't go boom, it doesn't go pow, and it's just pretty flat like copy lighting.
Absolutely. I mean, if you've got the two lights, have the fill light be a little less powerful than your key.
Cool. So what's up next after this?
Well, the only issue we have now is that she's got some beautiful dark hair, but it's kind of blending into the background. So the one thing I think we need to do is we need to throw a hair light on her, and that'll actually make her pop off the back a little more. So let me do that.
Yeah, so the hair light here is going to create some separation from the background, because when you separate the subject from the background, it just creates some more drama.
And there we go. You've got a nice little halo around here, and she's popping off of that background.
It's very dynamic, and that's what you're going for with a scene like this. So is there anything else?
Well, I know we said 3-point lighting, but we can actually add a fourth light, which we would add to the background and make the shot even more dynamic than what we already have.
All right, let's see it.
You got it.
So guys, the reason we're doing this setup in the studio, we'd love to have Maria talk, but for now we're just using her as a demonstration piece. You want to get this stuff ready during practice. You want to get it as right as possible here so that when you get on location, well, you're ready for the actual job.
So there we go. We threw that light on that back wall, and now she just jumps off the screen. We've got a great hair light. She's got a nice key. The fill's nice, softens all the shadows. She looks beautiful, and we've got a great shot.
Oh, yeah, there's a lot of separation. It's amazing to see what happens when you start with just one light. Then you add the second, you add the third, and you add the fourth. You just kept building and building until we get a final result like this.
It's a great scene. We could throw a lavalier on her. This could be great for her, for a CEO, for a musician. You could interview anybody. It would be just as professional as anything out there.
No, it's very cool. Nice job, Todd. And guys, as a one-man band, that's what Todd was right here. He did all of the setups. He changed all of the lights. He moved them around, because you can do this on your own. So whether you start with one light or you invest in 4 lights right off the bat, you can make it happen. So nice job, Todd. Let's move on to the next thing.
Let's light them up.
Jared here with another tip. When you're using a light stand, be sure to use a sandbag. All right, Todd, we've got a lot of audio things set up on the table, because audio is one of those things that a lot of people may forget about when it comes to video. Well, we certainly don't forget about it, because it is just as important, if not more important, than the video itself. Sometimes you can get away with not so good looking video, but if the audio is terrible, well then nobody's gonna listen to it or even watch it. So we wanna go over some of the different options that we have here that we personally use and you guys can use out there. So Todd, what do you wanna start with?
Well, the first thing we have is the actual on-camera microphone. Now that's not really the best source to use, and you want to avoid it at all costs. The only time you would really use it is as a reference track if you're having other audio sources recorded.
Sure, so when I first started out, this is what it sounded like with my YouTube videos. What you're hearing now is coming from the camera, and I talk loud, I project. It sounds like you're in a bathroom sometimes, because that's just what that thing sounds like. When I was making those videos in my backyard, I was picking up the birds chirping, the cars going by, the wind blowing, and it just wasn't the best. It wasn't always clear. So that's one of the options that we highly recommend staying away from, or just use it as a reference track. So other than the built-in audio, what else is important here?
Well, the first thing we have right here on camera is this little shotgun Rode mic. This one inputs right into the camera. Now here's another one that you would maybe put on a mic stand and you could hide it overhead.
Right, so that may be good for interviews. For example, we've got the boom mic right here. Can you please put it in, boom mic operator? Thanks. This is the boom mic. It usually stays out of the frame, and we had to yell at our audio guy to allow it to come into frame because he knows better than to do that. But this is what sounds great. It's solid, really good. But if you turn to the side, it may not be as good because I'm stepping out of the range of where the boom mic may be. So there's another option, which is what I'm wearing right here. I have a lavalier on, and that's something similar to this. This is a wireless option, but it also gives you the audio right here. So no matter if I turn or I go this way, it's going to stay with me as I have the audio. But you know what? These are a little more expensive, but just because these are expensive doesn't mean there aren't other options. Todd, what is one of those options?
I have got a wonderful wired lavalier mic here. Plugs right into your camera. Super long wire, run it up somebody's pant leg or right up their shirt, out of frame. Great sound at a great price. And this thing probably costs you 30 bucks.
Yeah, just remember that just because we talk about these options at maybe $400 or $500, we also use options that are under $100 because you never know when you need it. Having a $30 microphone in your bag may save your tuchus when your other mics go bad or you run out of batteries. And to have that option ready to go, if all you have is the camera audio and you can pick up a $30 microphone, just put that on. It's going to make your audio that much better in the camera. So that's one option. What else do we have here? I have another lav option. Now, what do they call this?
This is an external recorder because you're not recording directly into camera at this point.
Right, so you can plug in this Rode Smart Lav, which is kind of similar to what we're wearing under here, right into an iPhone. And there's pros and cons of doing this. If you get a phone call and you don't have this in airplane mode, well, you may just lose the audio you were recording. So Todd, what else do you have?
Well, we've got the zoom here, and this does a similar function. It's an external recorder. It's recording outside of the camera. But the one thing you need to remember is now that you have it recorded externally, once you get into your post process, you're going to have to sync those two things. And normally how we do that is with a clapboard. So we would take this, clap it, and then at that point you would see where the sound starts and be able to sync the good audio together in post.
Yeah, so basically what's happening there is that you will have your camera audio recording, you will have your off-camera audio recording as well. So when you clap the board, you have that spike or whatever's going on there, and that's what you can line up after the fact. Another way that you can do that is you can make sure that everything's being heard and you go, and then you can line that up in the computer. Just remember, the reason I like plugging right into the camera is so that I don't have to sync anything later. It's just one less step that I have to do later. But if you don't have that option and you need something like this Zoom, well, that works out as well.
And on the plus side, you know, a lot of the editing software nowadays will actually sync all that up for you. So as long as you've got everything there, it'll sync it all up.
Now, if you're gonna have two people in an interview because you have a job to get, you know, a bride and a groom talking, well, I've got something right here that is a Beach Tech, and that has two XLR inputs. It plugs into my wireless microphones. Then this plugs into the camera, giving me the ability to have two sources of audio, and Todd has something similar.
Yeah, this Juice Link does the same thing, but what's happening is this is actually splitting the audio when it goes into your camera and putting one channel into the left and one channel into the right, and that's how the camera is actually getting the two sources of audio. That to me is really valuable when you have, whether it be two people talking or if you just want to have two options for one person, the lav and the boom.
Sounds good. So as you can see, there are a lot of different options that you can have for being a one-man band and traveling around. Just know that audio is very, very important. We're going to touch base on that a little later on, but these are just some of the options sitting out here that we use and that you can also use as well. So we just showed you guys a lot of different options that you have to get audio into the camera, but there's one mistake that I made when I first started out because I didn't know any better, and that was how to set the audio levels in my camera. I set it to auto, and auto may not be the right choice. Why is auto not the right choice, Todd?
Well, it would be great if the camera did all the work. Unfortunately, when it's set to auto, when it's real quiet and nobody's talking, it looks for sound. So it raises your recording level and you get a lot of hiss. Next thing you know, somebody starts talking again and it compresses that audio to try to keep up with all the different levels.
Right, so basically what's happening there is the camera is set to auto and it's bouncing up, it's bouncing down based off of just whatever audio is there. So if you have some quiet times, it's really gonna raise those levels. You're gonna hear a lot of hiss, and that isn't good. I hear a lot of hiss in a lot of my early videos, and that really is the reason why. So what is the way around it?
Well, the first thing you gotta do is get out of auto and go to manual.
So another thing you want to remember is that depending on the camera that you have, the visual representations are going to be slightly different, but the theories all are the same. So now what are we doing?
Well, what you can see here is we've got this decibel meter here, and at negative 12 decibels, that is the optimal place you want your audio peaking. As you can see, we're talking, and the levels are kind of hanging right around that 12. Now, if all of a sudden I start talking loud, it gets up into here and it doesn't peak. That's what you want. You want to have the room to talk normal, and if something happens where somebody speaks up all of a sudden, it doesn't clip your audio and distort.
So that's why it's important to know the situation that you're in. There is no exact setting for just a general setting because it's all going to depend on what you're shooting. If you're at a rock concert, it's going to go one way. If you're talking, if you're interviewing somebody who's quiet, it's going to go somewhere else. So you just have to be prepared to set it properly. So what happens if we lower these levels all the way down?
Well, let's see what happens. We go down here to our recording level, and I'm going to turn it all the way down to the point where I'm almost turning the audio off. Now you can see I'm recording audio. Unfortunately, that audio is going to have a ton of hiss in it. You put that into your editing program and try to raise the levels to somewhere normal, unusable, not clean at all. You might as well have just been using the on-camera microphone.
So that's why it's important to get this pretty darn close.
Absolutely. So now say we overshoot that. Let's put it up a little higher. And I'm all the way up here. Now I'm just talking normal and it's in the red the entire time.
And you definitely don't want to be there.
No, and when you're in the red, you're peaking, it's distorting all of your audio. You might as well not even put on the microphone or even turn it on the camera at that point.
That's very cool. So this is really important. A lot of this is going to come down to you guys just practicing at home, figuring out how your microphone and camera work together. But when you're in the field, there's another thing that you can do to make sure that your audio is pretty close. What is that, Todd?
Well, a great thing to do is try to monitor your audio. We all carry around headphones of some shape nowadays. Not all cameras have the option, but there are a number of cameras now that give you the option to monitor audio live and even adjust the audio as you're recording. Now, if you don't have that option, do a test. Record a little bit, import it, listen to the sound, just so you can reassure yourself that you're not recording blindly.
Perfect, Todd. So this is very important. You want to get home, you want to practice this stuff so that when you get into the field and on location, you're going to get it right. So let's move on to something else.
That's good.
Here's another tip. If you ever unplug something on a set, for instance, a refrigerator, leave your keys in there because you know you can't get home without them. So now we're up to some general rules of video that we're going to hit. This is kind of a catch-all section. Todd, what are some of the things we're talking about?
We're going to talk about composition. We're going to talk about coverage. We're going to talk about the 180 rule. Not rules, I'm not trying to tell anybody how to shoot, but these are the options that you have to get the best picture.
Right, like anything that we have, you got to remember that it's not always about the rules. You can change them, you can tweak them, you can do whatever you need to get the shot. So let's take a look at some of the ways that composition can work with video. Now I want you to remember that with photography, there are a lot of rules of composition and a lot of them translate into video as well. So we're gonna hit on some of them. Todd, what are we looking at right here?
Well, we're gonna talk about rule of thirds, we're gonna talk about headroom, and we're gonna talk about some camera placement ideas that work well in your storytelling. Now, again, like you said, these are rules. Rules can be broken, but it's a good place to start because this is really a tool of your storytelling.
Sure, and you just have to remember that whatever story you're trying to tell, it's your job in the video to create that interest or to create that tension, and we're gonna do more of that as we move out into the field. Todd, what are we looking at right here?
First thing I'd like to drill down on is rule of thirds. I know a lot of people are probably familiar from the photo side with rule of thirds. There's a little crosshair in the middle of your screen. It's not a gun, it's not a target. You don't necessarily need to shoot straight down the middle. It's not a very dramatic look. If we can shoot you here dead center, you can kind of see that it's not really as interesting as maybe putting you off to the side.
Right, and those hashtags, those hash marks inside the camera, that's something that I used to get wrong at the very beginning, or not even just say wrong, it's something that I did because I didn't know any better. So my photos would have a person right in the middle and this much dead space at the top. And I had to learn that I shouldn't just be focusing right on the center of the frame because it kind of looked awkward and amateurish.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And the same thing applies to video. It's exactly the same thing. Now, if we put you frame left looking right and we leave a little room on the right, that's a little more pleasing. That gives you what folks call look room.
Right, and this is similar to what we do with leading lines in photography. How are you leading somebody into a frame or how are you leading somebody out of a frame? These are things that you want to look at.
Yeah, you're really guiding the audience to what's important. Now, Matt, if we can cut that space off here between the two of us, you know, folks may say that's something you don't want to do, but within video storytelling, if your two characters aren't really close, like maybe we're angry at each other, maybe we don't like each other, and to shoot two people like that can really help to push that storyline.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting hearing Todd talk about this. These are things that you want to get in your mind that are so different than shooting stills. Stills, you're capturing one image, but here Todd's talking about storytelling and story building. It's up to you to figure out what works best for your shot. And again, the rules are here, learn them, and then you can start breaking them for whatever works for you.
And I think this leads perfectly into headroom. You kind of alluded to that a little bit previously. Headroom, really, just want a little bit at the top, especially when you're coming into mediums, close-ups. Now, a big wide open shot, if you can kind of give us a big wide open shot there. Now, like in this room here, there's some cool lines here. There's some cool things you might want to show off architecturally. That might be good for a wide shot, walking into a room, or if you want to show something here. But keep in mind, if I'm showing you all this space, you're telling the audience that there's something important that may or may not happen here. So if you're making the stylistic choice, you might only want to use it for a few seconds in your edit, or there's a reason for it. If there's no reason for it, keep the focus on what's important. Who's telling the story, and it's probably your talent.
Sure, you just want to be careful with the headroom about the story you're trying to tell. If you leave too much, it may not work. So keep that all in mind. Depending on what your frame is, that's going to tell the story that you're trying to do. And that really bad composition, Hing, throw that up really quick, just show it. Oh, see, that's horrible. Like, it's not really good. It's not about the windows right here. It's about us talking.
If we were talking about the windows in the skyline, that's a great shot. But if that's not the case, keep it on your subject. Now, the next thing, another tool we've got here in terms of composition would be your camera placement. Now, right here, we're about at eye line level. Great place to start. Again, storytelling-wise, your talent is probably who's telling the story for you. Now, if you want to, let's drop it a little lower there, Hing. Let's come down a little lower. And now you can see, as we come down a little lower, it's a little more dramatic. This is great for the CEO, the mob boss, maybe the rock star type thing. This is really going to give you a dramatic look, makes the characters look larger than life, and if your story calls for that, it may be the way to go.
Right, and when I'm shooting a lot of my personal videos, I've always kept the angle below my eye level, sometimes a little lower, because I wanted to make me seem taller than I am. A lot of people come up to me the first time they meet me and go, I thought you were taller based off of your videos. Well, no, I'm only pushing 5'8" or 6'2", as I tell the ladies when my hair is up.
Absolutely. Now, on the opposite side of that, let's come all the way up. And you'll see that when we pop all the way up here, this kind of diminishes the character. Makes him seem a little more timid, a little more reserved. This might be the lackey. If the mob boss is cursing out his lackey, this makes them feel like a smaller character.
So you would have a tight shot, or you would have a tighter shot on the mob boss, and then when you would go and do the lackey shot, then you would do something like this at a higher angle to make him seem inferior.
Absolutely. It all comes down to what story you're telling. This is really a stylistic choice, and when we get into directing and talking about storyboarding, you should kind of pick these shots out ahead of time to save yourself some time.
Right, so for example, if we were shooting we got a job shooting a lawyer,
yeah,
and we know that this is a very powerful lawyer, we would want to come down all the way here, Hank. Can we bring it all the way down? This is your opening shot. As we're thinking about it, of the story we want to tell, you've got the lawyer right here. He's going to be big in the frame, but we know he's got a team behind him. So if you start with your establishing shot here, and then you raise it up to show everybody else in the scene, it's like, this is my team. This is who I'm working with. It tells a really, really interesting story.
It is, and you're utilizing multiple tools there. You're using camera placement. You're using camera movement. You're doing a reveal. It's knowing all the tools you have and then understanding how you can utilize them in unison to make the most powerful story you can.
So with a lot of these rules, learn them before you break them. But remember, it's about telling a story. Your job is to convey a certain story in the video that you're making, whether it's your own YouTube video or it's a corporate job. It's up to you to determine what tells the best story. So these rules are some of the things that you can start with. Todd, let's move on.
Let's do it. Todd here with another tip. Find out where the nearest hospital is to your shooting location. You never know when something might go wrong.
All right, so we just hit on some rules of composition. Those are general rules that we've been working with, and these are all things that you want to get right at the beginning so that you could break them in the future. Todd, what are some more rules we're going to get into?
Well, some good things I want to talk about now are coverage and the almighty 180 rule.
Now, this 180 rule is something that I just ruined at the very beginning, but it's something that I made the mistake once, and it never happens again. So that's why we're here to show you the examples to see what a good use of the 180 rule is and what it looks like if we break it.
So let me just give you the basics. We've got a camera above us here, and between the two characters, there's an axis between us. There's an eye line between us. We don't want to cross that eye line with our camera. We want everything to be on one side or the other. Right now, we've got all of our cameras on this side. That's generally where you want to keep them. It helps the audience understand where things are relative to one another. Now, if we cross that line, which we will show an example of, it will disorient the audience. Can you break the rule? Absolutely. But know the rules, and then you can break them.
Right, so keeping this simple with the 180 rule, what Todd said is you want to keep the camera on the same side, and you want to make sure that when you're thinking about it for post, because a lot of what you shoot in video should be thinking of how it's going to translate when you're done. You want to make sure that if Todd's talking to me, that I'm talking to him this way, and he's on this side, and I'm on this side, and it just works. It just feels cohesive and works much better.
This helps to establish continuity. Now, continuity is just allowing the audience to know where you are, where the space is, where everything is in relation to each other. So when I reference you, or I'm looking towards you, or I'm looking towards an object, our audience already understands what's in this space, in this world we're creating, and now you've got a good base.
So with continuity, you want to make sure that everything is similar throughout the shot, that if Todd had his glasses on in one shot, you'd want to make sure that his glasses were on in the other shot.
So with that being understood, the best way to kind of run through that is let's go through coverage and figure out how that 180 rule applies with all that different coverage. Now, coverage would be your wide, your medium, your close-ups, your over the shoulders. Again, you want to make sure the audience knows what's going on in your world. So if I reference something in a close-up, they've seen it in the wide, they've seen it in the medium, they've seen it in the two-shot. It all makes sense. It's all continuous. It's keeping your continuity intact.
I have one way you can get around that, Todd.
How's that?
That's called if you get it right the first time, you don't have to have any continuity issues because it's right the first time. But anyway, that's not going to happen for what you're doing as a one-man band to get these multiple angles, to get that 180-degree rule proper, and to get all the cutaways and medium shots. You've got to take multiple takes.
And a one-take Willie may work for anything. It may work for a narrative, for a commercial. It may work, but don't always count on it. You may think you nailed it in a one take on set, and you're like, yeah, it's great, I'm walking away. You get it in post, and you're like, oh, man, I wish I would have had something else. So that's where all this coverage comes into place, to where you can edit it down to the most effective thing.
So something to keep in mind when you are shooting is that somebody has to edit this. Whether you're outsourcing it to somebody else or you're going to be the editor yourself, you have to think about what kind of coverage do you need to make the shot cohesive and work. Todd, what are we moving on to next?
Your wide is going to set the tone for everything you do. Now, if we can kind of move back and show us in a wide shot, this would be great if we were entering the scene. We might come through the side, sit down, and get ready to have an arcade competition. You wouldn't necessarily want to live in this shot. This is an establishing shot, but the wide helps to set the tone, allows the audience to know where you are and what's going on and what you may reference in the closer shots. Another good thing about wides is it allows your talent to kind of run through the script, run through what they're going to say, where they're going to go in the scene, and when you go in for more coverage, you know where they land, so then all of your shots are continuous. You don't break that continuity. You may just want to randomly stand up, go over there and pick up a pillow because you need some extra cushion. I need to see that, so then when we go in for coverage, we know what's important to that scene and to the talent.
Now keep in mind, when you're a one-man band, you're doing all of this on your own. You're gonna do one shot over this shoulder. You're gonna do one shot over this shoulder, because you can do this all on your own. We're just obviously showing you with multiple cameras because that's how we're doing the shoot here.
So we talked about the wide shot. The wide's good for establishing where you are and talent entering or exiting a scene. Great place to be. The next thing you would want is a medium shot. You're getting more intimate with your characters, where it's not close up on our head, but it's kind of from the chest up. So let's come in a little tighter. Let's do a two shot.
So Todd, when you say a two shot, what are you referring to?
Two shot is there's the two of us. It also can be called a 3-shot. We throw a third person in here, we've got a 3-shot. It's a more intimate shot of the characters in your scene. Could be an entire group, but it's cutting the environment out and just drilling down to the subjects in the scene, but including them all. Now, again, we're following this 180 rule where we're not crossing this axis between us. This camera here is still on this side of us. The next thing we would go into is individual shots. Let's go to a close-up, but let's go to a medium close-up. Now, you could do your close-ups in a variety of ways. You could go from where this camera's at, throw a longer lens on there and get tighter shots, but they'd be kind of profile-y. So you may want to start swinging around, doing close-ups over the shoulder. The camera obviously is over your shoulder. There's a camera over my shoulder. So a medium shot, you'd have the hands, you'd have the chest. I might have a cup of coffee, I might have a cigarette, but by having a medium, you can show anything in the scene that's important that the character might reference. Now, I believe this shot might be a little dirty because we got a little bit of fro and shoulder in the scene here.
I guess I like to shoot dirty. I like to do it dirty because I like having it creates dimension.
It does. Having somebody dirty in the scene might be a good way to have intimacy between the two characters.
So it's kind of like glue. You're establishing that two people are talking in this case.
Absolutely. They're gonna recognize the purple shirt. They're gonna recognize the fro because they saw us in the wide. They saw us in this 2-shot. Now they're gonna realize that's exactly who he was talking to. We're not breaking the rule. All the cameras are still on this side of us, and it's still all good. It's a story that's not on paper, but that's a story you're telling by just your camera placement. Now, if I want to get a clean shot, we're going to probably have to go into more of a close-up, probably right around here. We've got some nice headroom, more of just the face. It's a close-up. Now, continuity-wise, we talked about glasses. You may be flailing around in one shot, and the next shot, your hands are really stable. If we've got a clean, then your actions don't interfere with my close-up. Again, that's a storytelling tool.
What you guys have to remember is that being that you're a one-man band, you have to think like an editor. You have to think, how am I gonna do this in post? Whether you're gonna send it to somebody else to edit, or you're gonna do the editing on your own. You're building this scene through the 1-shots, the 2-shots, the cleans, the dirties. You're giving yourself a lot of opportunity to have images or videos to cut to when you need to do that.
So we've got the medium shot, we've got the close-up, really great tools to get intimate and personal with your characters. Another great way would be an extreme close-up. So give me a little extreme close-up here. Boom. So, you might focus in closely on my eyes. I might be really angry with you. I might be giving you the business and you might have a close-up of my mouth. It's really just a way to help tell the story and you showing the audience what's really important in this scene. It's just another great tool to have in your arsenal.
So we've shown the proper way of doing the 180-degree rule. I think we have to show what it looks like when you break the rule.
Absolutely. With all of these shots, we have never broken this plane, this eye line between the two of us. We've always been on this side. Now, if we would take the camera over here and show you from the opposite side, it's gonna be really weird. We're gonna be talking in the same direction. It's almost like we're gonna be talking to a third person. It's really gonna be disorienting to the audience.
So in essence, you took your first shot on the one side, and then you're taking your second shot on the other, which is breaking that 180-degree rule.
Absolutely. So if I establish us in the wide and in the medium of me looking left and you looking right, you have to keep that. You should always be looking right. I should always be looking left, no matter where that camera is. That continuity should always be there. As soon as we jump the line and break that 180 rule, you've destroyed that. You're looking somewhere, or I'm looking somewhere where I shouldn't be looking. There's nobody there.
So in essence, if you're talking to me and then they cut from one to the other and we're both looking the same way, it's just going to be awkward.
Who are we looking at?
So it's not a very good, you've already established something and now it's just totally confused.
You've blown your continuity at that point. Now, look, shoots don't go perfect. Things happen and something gets messed up. A great way to get over that is B-roll, is cutaways. What we can do here is we could shoot the top of the table, the video game going on. We could shoot close-ups of our hands going. We could show quarters going inside this game as we go along to help kind of glue the issues that we have. I might fumble a line, which I do quite often. You're a one-take Willie, but we have to mesh those two things together. So those cutaways are gonna be critical to making a cohesive story and really just getting across what we want.
Yeah, cutaways are very important. It's that, like Todd said, the glue that keeps everything together so that when you need to cut to something, it's established. You've already know that somebody's talking, and if they're talking about putting the quarter in the machine, well, then you get the shot of the quarter going in the machine. Just think of all of those extra B-rolls and the extra things that you can pick up during a video shoot. It's pretty important to have that in the can just in case you need it.
So I think we covered everything in regards to coverage and the importance of that 180 roll.
Yeah, these things are important to remember. You have your medium shots, you have your wide shots, you're establishing, you're getting the cutaways, you're getting everything that you need. And then if you screw it up by messing up that 180 rule, you're not gonna be very happy with yourself. So try to learn from it right here, and let's see some of this in action.
Let's do it. Todd here with one more tip. To reset your 180, have your talent cross frame into the new position.
So we've talked about the fundamentals. We've hit the very basics of everything you're going to need to do when you get out into the field. So that stuff's really important. But before we get out to shoot, there's some other important things that we need to hit on. What are we hitting on, Todd?
Once you have everything down, all the basics we've talked about, it's go time. You're the director. And what are you going to do? So know exactly what you want to shoot, have it planned out, and how you're going to get it using the gear that you have. So you know exactly how to get your vision from the paper to the screen.
Right, and that also plays a part if you're shooting your own videos. When I go and shoot my own videos, I'm thinking about how am I gonna do this? Will this look good? Will this not look good? So I try to think about everything that I need to do even when I am shooting on my own.
And one way to know what you're doing is proper pre-production. That to me is the biggest thing I gotta stress. Script it out, storyboard it, shot list, planning for everything from gear to locations. Have something as a roadmap so you know what you need to get to make this project the best. Not to say that things can't happen naturally and organically when you're out on the field. You might be inspired when you get out there to do something different, but at least have a plan of attack.
Sure, and I know from the past, and Todd will attest to this, that he shot my very first beginner guide as well as the second guide, and I didn't have as much pre-production time as we do on this one, and this one ran much smoother because of the fact that we kind of had an idea of what we were shooting instead of just figuring it out on the fly.
And one way to get totally prepared is scripting out everything. Maybe not word for word, where things like this we tend to ad-lib a little bit, but have a script, have a storyboard, have a shot list. Those types of things will keep you on task, will keep you focused on what's really important to your production, and really just help things run much smoother.
Yeah, those storyboards are important when people are trying to see the vision for what you have, because you can lay it out for them in a storyboard, which gives them more confidence so that they're not worried about, do you know what you're doing? Do you know what you're talking about? You're actually showing it to them, and then you're able to get there much easier.
That's right. Now, another thing that helps with that client and talent is communication. Communicate what's going on. Lights, camera, action. Sounds a little cliche. You might not be calling lights and turning lights on, but you may call camera, rolling, sound, rolling. Doing a little mental checklist, even if you're just all by yourself, will communicate to your talent that action is coming, and you also can double check to make sure you've actually hit the record button.
Oh, that wouldn't be good.
That happens. It definitely happens.
Well, it happens once. If you forget to hit the record button, that's one thing that you only will make that mistake once. You'll never do it again. I did it with film in my camera back in the day when I was just starting out. I forgot to load the roll of film, and I was sitting there taking, and I'm like, shouldn't this roll have rewound by now? So it's a really good safeguard to say some of these things before you start shooting. And plus it gets people on set or whoever you're shooting prepared for it. So when you say action, they're ready to go. And again, it comes back to that confidence. You sound like you know what you're doing. You look like you know what you're doing. And hopefully after watching this, you know what you're doing. What else is there?
Well, another key to pre-production is know who you're shooting for. do a little research before you get there. So if you do need to do an interview or you just need to be familiar with the band's music, you don't really want to get on set and not know who they are. If you're familiar with the band or you're familiar with the company that you're working with, it's only going to allow you to sound more confident. You know what you're doing. You can relate to these people and know exactly what their business or their band is. If you're unfamiliar with them, they're not going to have a lot of faith in you portraying them on the screen in a good way.
And what I've found on many of my shoots, whether they're stills or videos, when I've done my research and I know something outside of the business area about these clients, we can just talk about, say, golf or talk about photography, just talk about things that are not the normal thing. So again, that loosens them up, that helps them on the shoot, and it just makes for you look much more confident and the day is going to go much smoother. What else do we have, Todd?
So one other big thing are locations. Where are you going to shoot this thing? You might have this grand vision, but if you don't know where you're going to shoot it, you might be missing out. We've been shooting in your loft. It's a great looking space. It's a character unto itself. So having that in your mind is a great place to start. Another thing to keep in mind in locations. Where are the restrooms? Where are places to eat if you need to feed the crew? And are there any sound issues? Is there a humming refrigerator in the corner that's going to mess up your audio? Something to really think about before you get there.
You have to get into the location, see what your needs are, and if you need to unplug the refrigerator, it's going to be fine until you get the shot that you need. What else?
Well, one of the most important things, what gear are you going to take? What camera, what lenses, what lights, what sound gear? What does your project need to get the best vision that you have? And also, what can you bring? You may be flying to another location. You can't take all the big stuff. You might need to bring a small pack. You need to think those things out because you don't want to get to a shoot, not have something vital to your production and miss the shot just because you forgot to make a checklist ahead of time.
Yep, the worst thing to have happen is that you leave a memory card at home or the battery at home, and now you just lost all your professionalism, knowing what you have, knowing what you need. You want to make sure that that's done before you get onto location because you don't want to look like you don't have that confidence. So Todd, what else?
So another thing I would say is be confident in your vision. And I say that because you want to have a bit of confidence when you're with a client, when you're with talent. If you've done all of your homework ahead of time, you should be confident in your vision and show that because everybody involved will pick up on your energy and that you know what you want and they will believe in your vision.
Sure, and remember that, guys. Confidence is the key when you're out there with a client. I don't care if you're shooting photos, you're acting, or you're shooting these videos. If you act as if, and then you can back it up, then they're going to look at you as if you were a professional. So make sure you know your gear, make sure you know what you're doing, direct them, and don't be, what am I going to do next? Act as if, show that confidence, back it up with quality product. What else?
Well, you definitely want to act like you know and be confident about your production, but you also want to be able to listen. There are good ideas that might come from crew members that you may have or just other talent on set. They may have really good advice. So have your vision, but keep an open mind.
So it's almost like having a cake and eating it too, because if you know your vision and you have an open mind to listen, sometimes you get those clients that want to just chirp in your ear all day. Well, you can listen to it, sometimes institute some of the things that they did suggest, or other times make it seem like you're saying, yeah, that's a great idea, we're going to get to that in a minute, and make sure you fill it in there some way, because sometimes they have some interesting ideas that actually turn out to be winners.
Absolutely. Last thing I would say is you've got to think about your talent. What might they need when you're on your set? You got your location, your gear's all set up. What does talent need? Well, they might need makeup. Do they need to take off just even a little shine from the lights? That's something to think about. Are they going to come makeup ready? If you're a one-man band, you may not have a budget for makeup, so you might just ask the client, hey, can you just be made up by the time you get here? Big help. That helps things progress a lot faster. A second thing you can do is rehearsal. Do they know what's happening? If it's a scripted thing, maybe they've had the script for a while and they don't need to, but you may still want to run through it together so that they know what's going on and what's important to you in the story. If they're coming on cold, they're not really familiar with the interview process or whatever shoot you're doing. If this is the first thing they've ever done, sit down with them, have a little chit chat. This is what you can expect. This is the storyboard that I've done. This will give you some sort of idea where we're going and what you can expect. It's going to make them a lot more comfortable.
Yeah, and you have to remember who you're shooting. You could be shooting a CEO. They may not be an actor or an actress. They may not get it right on the first or second or 27th take. So it's your job to direct them and get them to feel confident in front of the camera. We're going to do that when we get out into the field. We're gonna direct and tell people what they need to do, and just, that is what you have to do. You just have to get good at that, and we'll show you some demonstrations.
Yeah, and I think what really helps to sell that and make talent comfortable is if you do have a storyboard and a shot list. If I can sit down with you and show you, here's my storyboard, here's the vision, here's what we're shooting, they understand exactly what they're getting into, why they're shooting these shots, why they're shooting those shots, because you've got it all laid out in front of them. They know you know what you're doing, and they're gonna be even more comfortable with your shoot because of that. And another way to help them see it, playback. You might shoot a couple scenes, and when you know you've got something pretty good in the can, play it back for them. Show your client what's going on. Here's a shot. This is what this is a taste of what your finished product is going to look like. I've always found that's a huge confidence builder. You do a couple takes, show the client, and they're like, "This looks great. This looks amazing." From there on out, it can be smooth sailing.
Yep, that's about it, guys. That's true what Todd just said there. If you show them some of it now, after you get something good, well, then they don't really need to see it for the rest of the shoot because they already have it down. So we've covered a ton of information up to this point. We've done the basic stuff. Like I said, you may think it was a little boring, but once you get the fundamentals and all of this basic stuff in your mind and you're ready to get out there and shoot, well, that's when the fun happens, and that's what we're about to go do right now. Todd, let's get to shooting.
Let's get it.
Right before we jump into these 4 video shoots, I want to preface that these are extensive video shoots. Todd, why are these so extensive?
Well, I personally think they're a little short. They're about an hour a piece, but a normal video shoot would be 4 hours, 6 hours, 8 hours, 14 hours. And I want people to see all the nuance and detail that go into each and every take. Even if we're shooting the same exact shot 2 times, 3 times, there are little things that change from shot to shot that are really important for people to see so that they can take those things and put them into their videos.
Yeah, the point to get across for you guys in these video shoots is that it doesn't happen in 45 minutes. As a one-man band, you have to set up multiple angles. So if you're doing one take and yet takes 20 minutes, then you have to reset the lighting to do another take for something else. It's going to take time. So you want to pick up different intricacies in each one of the takes that we show you just so that you know what goes into it, because it's not going to be easy when you get out there on set to just shoot it in one take and be done, especially as a one-man band. So these 4 shoots, like we said, they're extensive. They may seem long at points, but you don't have to watch all 4 at once. You may watch one and then come back to watch another. Or you may not want to make a music video today, but you get that phone call from somebody who says, "Hey, can you make a music video?" Well, you can refer back to the music video section, and then you know exactly what you're in for when you go and shoot a video. So Todd, anything else you want to add?
Well, I would also say, we don't get into too much detail regarding editing, but as you watch these sections and then you see the finished product, you're gonna see why we had numerous takes of one thing and what pieces we pulled out and why it was important to do multiple takes when you see the final product. I think it's gonna be a very educational source for people when they're thinking in terms of what parts do I need for this shoot, what parts do I need for that shoot, and how will I piece them together at the end.
There are a lot of subtle nuances in these video shoots. You're gonna pick up on things from one take to the next, like why Todd is asking the actor to do it this way versus that way. But like he said, there are little editing tips that you're going to see. You're gonna understand why Todd used one clip versus using the other clip just by watching the final product. So now it's time for you to watch these 4 video shoots.